temporary in nature. We have seen that many of the shops that have been targeted have been smaller businesses, not in malls where the security is more easily breached. So worthwhile for those businesses to take those alternative mechanisms. It's worthwhile noting that the province did supply mechanisms for liquor stores to remove their stock from their premises and store those centrally. Provisions were made within the regulations, and I understand only 38 liquor stores across the city took up that option, and so unfortunately they have come in for the brunt of the looting. With the extension of the 2 weeks of regulations, it is likely that we will see more of that behaviour, so our staff are all on high alert, and this has been a subject of extensive discussion with the police and the SANDF. The public can report any incidents of such looting or threat of looting to the 10111 call centre or the South African Police to their local police station, to the cluster job, or to the city on 107 from a landline or 021480 7700 from a cell phone number. Director Roberts or Edie Bosman, anything that I left out on the issue of the looting? Maybe in terms of the operational approach, Director Roberts?
Thank you, Alderman. Yes, I'm Director Roberts. I'm the operational coordinator for the operations in terms of the City of Cape Town. And I can just indicate to you that on a daily basis we are having a provincial coordinating operational committee that's coordinating all the crime-related issues regarding to COVID-19. At this particular meeting with all the different role players in the city, where the South African Police are taking the lead, and the City of Cape Town in terms of Metro Police, traffic and law enforcement support the South African Police in our approach with regarding to crime-related incidents. In terms of the looting, I can just indicate to you that we are currently following a cluster approach, 30 clusters within the metropole, and the cluster commanders have their own operational plan, and the Metro Police, traffic and law enforcement supplement the South African teams in these clusters to attend to these issues. I can also indicate to you that we've got a metropole reaction team that are currently assisting the cluster approach with regarding to any crowd management issues or any looting issues within any priority area or priority cluster. And then I can also mention that on a daily basis at the Profjob meeting, we get briefed by the Intelligence Coordinating Committee of the South African Police, existing out of the SAPS, the SANDF Intelligence and the SSA, with regarding to the crime situation within the province and within the metropole, and those operations are focused with regarding to that particular input from the ICC.
Just say something. I just want to raise something that Alderman Smith raised. We looked at our meeting today at the issue of contingency replacements in the event that we have a problem in our call centre. You would have picked up that SAPS had a difficulty with one of the members that was actually infected, which took out a whole shift at the facility. We've got redundancy facilities in the Civic Centre, as well as in the old 44 Wales Street building. So if we do have a situation where we have staff that are ill or there's a shift that's ill, the incoming shift could then pick up service continuity at another facility, so they wouldn't expose them to the same level of danger. And that is something which we're looking at from a corporate basis, but as we currently are, if anyone on a current shift in the 107 centre is sick now, the shift coming in tonight could either come into the Civic Centre and be fully functional, or move them to the Wales Street facility where we've kept 10 chairs for redundancy, so we have continuity in terms of service delivery for certain phone calls. And that is something we've had to apply our minds to yesterday. As these are not necessarily risks that you would have picked up if somebody had a cold or flu. This is a different situation where people are going to self-isolation or quarantine, so we've sorted that out. So if it does arise, we will be able to have service delivery continuity for people to call our centre for emergencies, for fire, traffic, or even law enforcement.
I will tell you that there were many times when we were setting up these facilities and setting up the Disaster Operations Centre, when we discussed how these needed to be configured and designed and the role of TMC, and whether we close up old facilities, where we agreed to keep some of these open for redundancy purposes. For instance, down on the third floor of this building, there is a backup facility for your disaster operations in case it comes to that. the 44 Wales Street call centre was kept open as a redundancy facility. And we used to talk about the meteorite or the, you know, whatever other freak occurrence or act of God may occur that would incapacitate your main facilities. We never thought it would be, I don't think we ever discussed the opportunity or option of a virus doing that, and certainly last night 111 coming or closing came as a surprise. So I think we're quite grateful now that we had the foresight to provide those continuity mechanisms. The other big issue that I think that is coming up prominently and that is leading to civil unrest is the issue of food security or food support. It is now getting to the point where many families and communities where people rely on odd jobs or piecemeal work, where people are not being paid on a regular basis. They don't have fixed employment contracts. They get paid when they work and they're not working, so at the moment they're not having incomes. This is hurting a lot of people very badly, and with the extension of the lockdown, I think there's a degree of desperation entering many people's minds. You will have seen the video made about a family busy cooking food and the lady appealing to the state president around the implications of the lockdown. So we are getting a large number of queries on this matter, including to our call centre, and we thought it was important to remind people of what the law says. So in law, SASSA is responsible for social relief of distress. That's Chapter 3 of the Social Assistance Act. The provincial DSD has been mandated to supply supplementary assistance. The Western Cape Cabinet took that decision due to the fact that SASSA wasn't in a position to provide paid social relief for the first weeks of the lockdown because their local offices had been closed by a directive issued by the National Minister of Social Development, and the national call centre was overrun. They also had no budget left from their previous financial year and could only start procuring service providers for food parcels from 1 April when they got their budget for the new financial year. They now have around 10 million rand for food parcels, which they're procuring at around 900 rand per parcel, and that will give them around 11,000 food parcels, and as you can appreciate, that won't go very far. So the Provincial Department of Social Development has decided to do something supplementary, and so has the city, because we can see the incredible distress the situation is creating. So at stage 1 food relief, there was a stage 1 food relief plan that was developed with a total of 53 million rand reprioritised within the provincial government, 18 million rand from the provincial treasury to the education department to resume the feeding schemes that would normally take place at the schools. Many children at those schools are dependent on the school feeding schemes, and with the school closed, they are missing out on those. So they have resumed those, and our school resource officers are supporting them. I will be visiting one of those in the next 2 days. And there was 20 million rand set aside, which the DSD reprioritised internally for 50,000 food parcels. These funds were paid over to Red Cross, Mustadafin, Islamic Relief, and Sanzaf. And these NGOs are also supplementing this with their own fundraising and resources to get the parcels out. The parcels contain food for a month for a household of 4 to 5 persons. And the first delivery of those already went out with slightly smaller packages. Those will be supplemented. They started distributing these before the full packages were available. And those are already starting to go out. There's 15 million rand extra to 92 feeding scheme sites, which are also providing hot meals on a daily basis to 20,000 people. The stage 2 food relief plan is being developed. And that will expand the reach of the food relief. They're engaging with municipalities across the province to do that. And then the City of Cape Town is adding to that. You will have seen that the Mayor over the last few weeks has been handing out food and bags of ingredients, 25 kilogram bags of ingredients along with pots and cooking, gas cooking stoves to certain councillors and to certain organisations. That will be expanded now to all the wards. As a trial, the Mayor is happy that that is an effective intervention, and we will be adding cooking pots, ingredients for food to all the city councillors, and I can confirm that the Mayor's office this morning has started calling all the councillors. By the end of today, they will have called all the councillors and ask them where they want their ingredients and cooking utensils delivered. So we're trying to do as much to assist. How do people access the food aid? People who need help can contact the Western Cape call centre. They capture the caller's details and send this to DSD. The DSD has compiled a database which they've sent to their local offices, and they're checking that against SASSA's SOC pen list to ensure that households haven't received a parcel from SASSA as well. And they're doing a telephonic assessment through a social worker of the prospective beneficiaries against their criteria list. And then they'll dispatch the relief via the NGOs to these beneficiaries. In terms of the response time for the request, so far, from the time of the request to delivery has been around a week. 4,000 parcels have been distributed thus far. They are trying to shorten that to around 3 or 4 days. The provincial call centre has been overwhelmed, which created a backlog. That has now been eliminated. The call centre normally runs with around 17 operators, but the Department of the Premier, with the help of the Economic Development Department, has increased this to 83 call takers as of today. So I know you will have seen people who express frustration with not being able to get through to the numbers provided, but they have 83 call takers as of today, so that should run a lot more smoothly. Director Roberts or Edie, anything on the food support, food security issue?
Alderman, other than that, Director Roberts will indicate we've been asked to assist with the handouts at various sites, and they're providing us with that information so we can have staff to stand down there and assist that at least it's done in an orderly manner, and that the people that are intended to get it, they were dealing with it. Robbie, you can fill in more?
Yes, just from our side, our school resource officers are currently deployed with the Department of Education and the South African Police to deal with all the different schools in terms of the feeding scheme at these schools, and to ensure the safety and security of the learners to school and from school, and also to make sure that they are arriving safe at home. The other issue is we identified the distributing points on a daily basis with regarding to the sites of food distribution, and to ensure that there's visibility and integrated approach in terms of visibility at those particular sites, and to ensure that should we need to deal with crowd management at the different sites, that all the role players are aware of these sites, and that we are proactive with regarding to our operational approach.
That brings me to the other issue that we've gotten a lot of media queries on, which is the Strandfontein shelter. I can perhaps preface this by saying that the amount of misinformation and rumours around this is at the moment almost debilitating to deal with. I think you will have seen myself and the ED's exasperated response on our WhatsApp groups with the media, where almost hourly fake news is contrived. If it's not false information about murders or false information about rapes, etc., then it is something else, but it is really difficult. And we are finding that certain reporters and especially some public office bearers are publishing this information as fact, then fact-checking the information, determining that it's not true, not apologizing, not withdrawing the information, but leaving that information sitting on Twitter, for instance. And that's extremely problematic. I understand that it's open season always on politicians. I accept that that comes with the job. But it's not open season on our professional staff. So I must say I'm somewhat aggrieved by how some people are conducting themselves, and I'm hoping that the situation will improve. At the moment, the numbers at Strandfontein are steadily reducing. That is primarily because we are succeeding in reintegrating people. 38 people were relocated to families and friends where they've indicated they have somebody to stay with. The social workers have been able to contact those families and friends, and they have reintegrated 38 people. We've also returned 48 people to the street, where people have said that they're unwilling to stay at Strandfontein. We said from the beginning that we would not detain people against their will. There's a new development on that, which I will ask the ED to speak to now in terms of a legal opinion that we received today. We did 6 days now, almost 7 days ago, ask SAPS for a legal opinion on what they want. Because the problem is that the guidance from national government comes with forked tongue, or at least in a confusing manner. On the one side, we're told people must be off the streets, that if you violate the regulations, you will be arrested and put in prison, from Minister Clearly. And on the other side, public office bearers senior public office bearers within the governing party are also saying you can't detain somebody against their will, people must be on the street. So this is confusing, and that kind of environment is confusing for the public, the media, and the implementers of facilities like this. We've also taken stock of what's happened at Joburg and other sites where there have been major problems, and we've tried very hard to prevent some of those. So where we've had people who have been consistently unwilling to cooperate or destructive or harmful to other people at the shelter, we have removed them from the facility and taken them back to where they came from. 48 people have been removed back to Camps Bay, Woodstock, Culemborg, Mitchells Plain, Goodwood and Bottersig. And these individuals include, for instance, the 2 gentlemen who were claimed by somebody to have, in quotes, escaped. Well, you can't escape because you're not held against your will, but who apparently escaped and then had a story to tell on social media. As it turns out, upon investigation, those 2 individuals had looted the Haven Night Shelter's stores and were then asked to leave the camp. They were dropped back where they came from in Muizenberg because they were simply being too destructive at Strandfontein. We're really not keen to keep people there who don't want to be there, but there is a further development now with the legal opinion, which I think the Executive Director can speak to in a moment. What I do want to tell you is that we said right from the beginning that we wished we had more time, lead time to prepare Strandfontein. For instance, social distancing was a problem. Many of the cities who have prepared or have accommodated homeless people did not do what the regulations required. They made token gestures to accommodate street people. So they accommodated 100 or 300, or in one case 18 homeless people, and then took the media to these sites. But of course, you know, the vast majority, 80–90% of homeless people are still in the streets, so no meaningful attempt was made to actually accommodate everybody. When you start doing that, it creates an entirely different level of challenge for you. And that challenge is reflected when you start getting to the levels of occupancy at Strandfontein. And I'll say something about Paint City and the others in a moment. So we took the regulations very seriously and tried to give genuine implementation to the State President's call. And as such, Strandfontein then had to accommodate a very large number of people. The tents, as you were, those of you who were there on the first day and the Sunday, you will have noticed that only about half the tents were up then that are up now. So we're constantly improving the facilities there, and we are now able to say that we're fully in compliance with the social distancing requirements. There are 8,775 square meters within the various tents, with 1,400 people on site. So you will, if you do the maths yourself, you'll see we're well within the guidelines now for social distancing. And that is something that every day at the site, the site is evolving and more services are being provided for there. There are challenges with Wingfield and Paint City. Remember that the city did not create the Paint City site for refugees, so we are not rendering services there other than cleansing services. We will need to discuss that with national government, and at Wingfield we're supplying some more services in terms of the agreement with Minister Motsoaledi, and we are we will be expanding those. There are currently meals being served at Wingfield, and there is a law enforcement officer in charge of that site. But there is need for improvements in the amenities at both those sites. The Strandfontein site was not intended to be the only site in which we took people in. We're intending to go live with the Paint City site by no later than Monday. There is final work being done to prepare that site and on-site meetings to ensure that it is ready to go live and that all the service providers are on site. Paint City looks like we would like all of our facilities to look. We've had a year to set that up, as we did with the safe space at Culemborg, and that we're therefore able to run that facility as we would have liked. You will notice at Strandfontein, if I may report to you, that there is now ongoing improvements in terms of the service providers running additional services there. We have developmental services that have started, especially with Oasis, the one NGO there. And we have also now made available vanity packs. The last of those vanity packs are being packed and will be distributed. This is one of the needs identified by the people at the site. Now I have 4,000 blankets, 8,000 bars of soap, and 2,000 mattresses distributed at the site, and constant cleaning services, and adequate medical services for everybody. I can tell you we serviced about 500 people in 3 days with medical treatment. So there are people at the site who have not had medical treatment or accessed medical treatment in a decade or more, for the first time are accessing such medical services. And for instance, whilst we have had 0 COVID positive cases, we have had numerous TB positive cases, which Councillor Badruddin has issued a statement on. Those are in isolation facilities and are staying separately from the others. Some have now started treatment, and one has been hospitalized. So the situation at the site improves, and I am informed that on the most recent inspection of Commissioner Nissen, he was satisfied with what he saw. I know that one of the delegates who was with him on the inspection contacted me directly and said that they were increasingly satisfied with how things were running. There were reports today of a second death and a second rape. I can tell you conclusively that neither of those are true. Edie, you want to add something around the legal opinion?
One of the issues for us the last few days has been people wanting to leave the camp and just saying, well, we're going to leave. We've looked at this from 2 points of view. There are people who genuinely are being reintegrated with their families, they've got addresses, they've got houses. We gladly transfer those people there. That's the idea, is to get them back into their families. And then we had other people saying, well, we're just unhappy, we don't want to be here anymore. So we've pursued this with our legal services, and we've been told that in terms of the current lockdown regulations, that we're fully entitled to contain them in the isolation centre until such time as the lockdown regulations are finished. In most cases, they can't provide us with fixed accommodation, they can't provide us with an address, which will mean they're back on the street again, where they shouldn't be. So we've been advised that we can contain people in the facility until such time as the lockdown period is over, and we've conveyed that. I must say we've had a few difficult days at the camp, with some people wanting to leave and others not wanting to leave, but they have settled down. The services have improved, there's running water, there's showers, there's meals twice a day, there's mattresses, there's blankets, there's a host of services that have been rendered. Most of the people have started to settle into some sort of routine as things are, and they've adjusted to what's happening. We're constantly reviewing the camp in the light of complaints or criticism received. So there's been a huge improvement from last week Thursday to this week where we are now. And in actual fact, we're now casting our eyes towards Pain City, saying, well, we need to open Pain City by Monday to look at accommodating the homeless people in the Bellwood area, which is at least another 250 people. That facility is almost ready. We're going to do a final inspection on Sunday morning, but Monday morning we're opening up, so we'll have that facility also available.
So in terms of numbers, Pain City will accommodate another 250 people. We were hoping to use the tent outside, but we've not been able to relocate the refugees to Wingfield as was originally intended, which would have made that tent available for homeless persons. So we will have to confine ourselves to the 250. We are a bit concerned about the relationship between the issues that may result between homeless persons and the refugees, but we will make sure that there's an adequate security deployment to minimize those situations. Edie, just a correction, there's 3 meals a day, and some of the NGOs there are intermittently adding a 4th meal just to deal with cravings from people coming off drugs. We've had people also show up at the site asking to stay. We had, for instance, 6 this morning who asked if they could stay. There's not all the officials are comfortable just taking people in because they're saying that they want criminal record screening, but those criminal record screening has not been available from SAPS. It was originally part of the setup of the facility where we'd agreed we would do criminal record screening before people were brought to Strandfontein, but when SAPS withdrew from or indicated they weren't available for that, the intake into Strandfontein had to be done without the criminal record screening. We've also had people call saying that they are in touch with homeless people who would like to move to Strandfontein, and we've indicated that where that is happening, we're happy to, because there's now additional space being opened up with people being reintegrated with families. Then perhaps some other news. I think one of these things that is being reported to us that is driving up temperatures, I've had personal reports of it, and was also reported at the job today, is the issues of spaza shops hiking prices significantly in some cases, and I think this is giving rise to much community anger. There has been a threat that people will attack or loot these shops if they keep on increasing the prices. So I think a message we want to send out to the spaza shops and the tuck shops is remember that the price gouging or increasing your prices of essential goods is a violation of the lockdown regulations. It is not permissible. People can complain about it, and we will issue fines if it's a breach of the regulations. So we're asking that the spaza shops behave responsibly and not give rise to provocation. I think also problematic is the ongoing finding of liquor sales and the distribution of liquor. There were 2 South African breweries vehicles who were delivering beer that were stopped. This is extremely problematic from a major distributor and producer of alcohol. We should certainly not have seen that. The trucks were initially impounded and then returned to the South African breweries. And these matters are certainly something that we need to look at. The Executive Director has mentioned the challenges experienced by 10111 and the fact that the city has redundancy facilities. We are reaching out to SAPS to see if the facilities we have available, our fallback facilities, are not perhaps usable by them. And that, of course, would be IT dependent. Our health department reported that at the moment the city is sitting on 575 infections, 33 people in hospital, 12 in ICU, and that across the province we've had 10 deaths. We have seen a significant increase in local transmissions, and especially transmissions at shops and supermarkets. So I think that's notable. It is evident if you visit in many of the places, the food supermarkets across the city, that people are not adhering to social distancing. Now, you will have heard us talk some time ago about recruiting disaster management volunteers from the neighbourhood watches. I can confirm for you that that is happening today. We've had just over 40 neighbourhood watches take us up on the offer. The first 4 neighbourhood watches are having their papers issued, their appointment certificates issued to them this afternoon. And tomorrow, throughout the day, disaster management will be working to sign up many more neighbourhood watch members. So we are excited about that. That will add at least at this stage another 400 to 500 disaster management volunteers who can help us. Their primary focus will be social distancing at supermarkets, because this is evidently an area of high infection risk. Then also social distancing at clinics and public transport interchanges, assisting with the sanitation, monitoring that the sanitation is available at those, and also looking at the security at our clinics, schools, and other government facilities that are currently closed and are therefore coming in for higher levels of vandalism than normal. So we're very grateful to them for adding this additional capacity and their appointment certificates to the Disaster Volunteer Service. Remember, we have 420 active disaster volunteers, so their numbers will now be significantly enhanced through this process. Edie, anything your Director Roberts want to add?
Well, just something that we've got 116 disaster volunteers that are going to continue awareness programs from today right up until the end of the month in various communities. These are our volunteers who are at home, and they're offering up their time and effort to come. So they go out in groups of 30 to 40, and they go out into the communities talking about the need for hygiene, the issue around social distancing, and just general prevention and awareness. So it's proved to be invaluable, and we're actually continuing the program until the end of this month. After we will reevaluate and look at areas that possibly have higher than normal incidences, where we could maybe target those areas and increase the awareness. So a lot of the neighbourhood watchers that are on board as volunteers will also join them, and we're hoping that we can get to as many local communities as possible.
Just part of the integrated operational approach in terms of the clusters within the Metropole and the Metropole team as well, is that we identified the hot spots where social distancing are not adhered to, specific those shopping centres or shopping malls, and we are part and parcel of the integrated approach with the police, mental police, traffic and law enforcement to adhere to that, and the disaster management volunteers will actually assist us greatly to deal with these issues, while we can then focus on the crime outside.
Okay. Further to the issue of the land invasions, there's current legal action around the land invasion issue. So we're not in a position to say a great deal, as these matters are subject to current legal process. But I can tell you that the land invasions have now become quite frequent. in some cases hourly, so we're seeing continuous land invasions at the same sites over and over, and this is presenting our staff with significant challenges, damages being done to vehicles and equipment, as well as protest action or public disorder incidents leading to the damaging of municipal infrastructure. So it's presenting quite significant challenges to us and SAPS, and we are collaborating with SAPS on these incidents. On the waterfront, or on the side of water, I should tell you that you will have noticed the media event yesterday in Scottsdene and at Nkandla Informal Settlement. In the east of the city, where 23 JoJo tanks were erected, water reports that they are thinking of adding water connections to this so that they don't have to deliver water with tankers in confined spaces. The grey water handling is also addressed at these sites. The next tanks are being distributed, I think he said tomorrow, at Kailicha. The water tank distribution is happening, and we have around 240 tanks still available to be deployed. The water services said that this means that at this stage they have now just hit over the 500,000 mark in terms of water service points reached, and are distributing around 10 million, since the beginning of this process, have distributed 10 million litres of water. An interesting fact that has come up is the issue of stolen records reports. So the city has mechanisms for identifying where municipal infrastructure is stolen or vandalised. And something that might have been predictable is now being carried out or evident in the stats. During the week of the 8th of March, we had 162 such reports of incidents. 15th of March, the week of the 15th of March, 121. The 22nd of March, 126. Then from the 29th of March onwards, they dropped significantly down to 83, 53, and even lower. So we have seen a dramatic reduction in the theft and vandalism of council infrastructure during the lockdown. And I think we attribute that significantly to the closure of the scrapyards, bucket shops, etc. So there is definitely a lesson to be learned here. If national government is paying attention, please note that all of municipal infrastructure across South Africa is probably seeing equivalent drops in the vandalism of our infrastructure. And much of that is achieved by something as simple as the closure of these bucket shops and scrap dealers. You will have seen a similar phenomena with the trauma centres, where the hospitals reporting a two-thirds drop in the number of trauma incidents being faced by those hospitals, which again predictably the result of the non-availability of alcohol. And Solid Waste reported that all of their backlogs have been caught up with. They've only got now small intermittent delay issues. Something we would like to raise with the public, though, is that many of the members of the public are still attempting to access the drop-off sites. These drop-off sites are not supposed to be open. Keep in mind that you're only permitted to be on the road for essential travel. So we have members of the public coming to drop-off sites expecting to drop garden refuse, etc. And we have now asked law enforcement to just start maintaining or intermittently patrolling these sites, because the public bringing garden refuse and other stuff to drop-off sites is problematic. In terms of transports and logistics, the PTIs now have sanitation and cleansing services in compliance with the regulation. My city is running on around 8% of its capacity. That's 9,300 journeys per day. And our freeways are seeing around 23% of the normal traffic volumes, which again is expected. That figure probably higher than it should be, and hence the 5 standing roadblocks and roving roadblocks and intermittent random stops of vehicles that we're engaging in. We want to remind everybody that only essential travel is permitted, and that at the public transport interchanges we are enforcing that, and the next lockdown is, the next social grant collection will be after the end of the lockdown. Then in terms of the new regulations, new amendments in the regs were issued by COCTA. There is not major substantial changes. We were hoping for more sweeping changes in the regulations, including, for instance, takeaways perhaps and restaurants being permitted, so that food could be bought and removed, because it is important that as many sectors of our economy are able to function. we are very worried about the long-term impact of the lockdown, and especially the extension thereof. The areas affected primarily focus on the essential goods. There are extensions of the number of essential service providers. Plumbers and electricians are now considered essential providers where they do house visits. Hardware shops may be open but must keep a register, so they're supposed to supply to tradesmen but not otherwise. The restrictions on exports have been eased, and we have clarity from SAPS on the spaza shops, who now say that spaza shops are not required to have a lockdown permit. The city has issued 868 trading licenses during the time when this clarity was not obtained. We will continue to do so, but SAPS now say that it is not required for them to have such permits. In terms of the corporate call centre, we've had 12,963 calls during the lockdown just from them, of which they've managed to cover 91%. From the emergency call centre side, in the last 24 hours that we've handled 1,367 calls with 101 calls abandoned. That's a 6% call abandonment rate. 4 calls were specifically around COVID infections. The total service request sent on to our staff was 1,041, with 295 of these relating to the violation of COVID regulations. So that's people complaining about the violation of regulations. We had a 97.1% resolution rate of our priority 1 cases. So I think that's the sort of main highlights of what has been reported at our job. Director Roberts and Executive Director Bosman, I don't know if you want to add anything that I've missed.
You've covered everything.
All right. So if there are questions and answers, we're happy to field those. And if you can just identify yourself and ask your question. Kaylin, can we start with you? Just use your microphone so that it's picked up.
I hope no one is live.
Good afternoon, JP. I just have a question on the Stamford site. There were obviously reports about the fines that some of the homeless people receiving. Just clarity as to what is the purpose of issuing these fines. Also, I do remember last year this issue was brought up and was actually taken to court. So what is the procedure around this fines, and why exactly are they receiving these fines? Also, Doctors Without Borders have reported that the Stamford site is health hazard. Have you been in contact with them? Will you take, if you have been in contact with them, what sort of feedback did you get from them, and what recommendations will you sort of implement? And then just engaging with other municipalities that have sort of set up homeless sites. Have you been in conversation with them as to how they are sort of handling it, or what advice are you getting from them?
Director Roberts or Edie Bosman might want to expand on the issues of the fines, but I can tell you that, let's just go back to the court ruling. The court ruling said that, that it is lawful and that the city may continue to issue fines, and that this is the appropriate intervention. You can in fact not discriminate against people when issuing fines. It would be unlawful and improper for an official to stand and decide this person may get a fine and this person not. The Constitution requires equitable enforcement of your bylaws and laws across the board. It is for the court to decide what to do with those afterwards. So the incident yesterday concerned a single person who was threatening other people at the site, who was issued a fine, not multiple, but a single person. This is the end result of the operator on the site, the NGO who works with them, being unable to manage this person's conduct over a period of time. If you understand some of the individuals present at the site, you will appreciate that the fact that we've only had to resort to this once is quite extraordinary, and it's a testament to the patience and endurance and professionalism of the staff on the scene, because you have some truly difficult people. I mean, even just the handing out of foodstuffs and stuff that I was present at when we went to go hand out Easter eggs, the conduct of some people, they were so aggressive towards other people at the site that it is difficult to understand that we're not having more frequent incidents. So the fine was issued because it was a last resort. The alternative would be to arrest a person. When you assault another person, the appropriate intervention is to arrest a person. That person is going to be taken to SAPS and be released back on the street, which actively defeats the intention of the lockdown regulations. So we stand by the fact that our duty of care is to everybody at the site. Some of the people who sought to score political points with us seem not to care that other people at the site who are being threatened are also homeless. And I don't know if those individuals' safety is not important to them, but it is to us. Because if anything happens to anybody else, then we will have a problem. You ask about sites elsewhere in South Africa. I read with interest what was going on at some of the Johannesburg sites with weapons and drugs and stuff being confiscated during police raid. We're trying very hard to make sure that we maintain a level of order that prevents us from having to have police raids and weapons being confiscated and gangsters gaining control of the site. So considering some of the individuals that are out on the street on parole, but potentially with outstanding warrants of arrest or parole conditions which they're in violation of, which SAPS have not acted on over a protracted period of time. In other words, you've got parolees out on your street who shouldn't be there, who are not allowed to be there, or in violation of their parole conditions, who live amongst homeless people on the street. It is a challenging thing to deal with people. And whether you deal with them 10 at a site, 100 at a site, or 1,000 at a site, the challenges remain consistent. The problems that were experienced with the alleged rape, for instance, occurred in one of the smaller tents. And that's why we chose to have larger open tents for the sake of the safety of everybody. Because as soon as you start dealing with smaller facilities that are not open to scrutiny, it begets a far more dangerous situation for everybody there. So we were very purposeful in looking at larger facilities that were open and open plan. In terms of Doctors Without Borders, Councillor Badruddin is currently meeting them on site. He's having this conversation with them. We take all such inputs very seriously. But I will tell you that, I mean, if you look at, for instance, the legal letters written to us by Difuno Kwazi, if you boil the letter down, there's only really one issue the letter addresses, and that's the issue of social distancing, which we have now adequately achieved at the site. Doctors Without Borders raised much the same concerns in terms of the extent of infection control, which is why you see the site is segmented into components so that there is less possibility of people contaminating the entire site, that it is the contamination or an infection that can be contained. Which is also why it's problematic for people to come and go. If everybody is on site and is COVID-free to start with, everybody who's on site will be COVID-free when it ends. This is why the service staff coming on site, you will see, are fully covered in PPE, those who are bringing meals, for instance, because we're very serious about protecting the people there from infection. If everybody starts infection-free, they end infection-free. And that's why the site is set up as it is. The site does comply with all of our municipal health bylaws. The environmental health inspectors visit the site daily and report any defects which we are expected to address urgently. And we are looking very carefully at what's happening to other municipalities and have read through the media coverage and such as there are of the lessons being learned there. I don't know, Director Roberts, if you want to add anything else about the fine being issued or arrests, Richard Bosman.
Well, when the fine was issued, we checked up on it yesterday, and the person was threatening the staff member and being abusive towards him, and they acted appropriately under the circumstances. And I must emphasize, there was one fine. There's no fines. It's important to emphasize that. Staff have been spoken, they've been told to restrain themselves, to act accordingly, but there's been instances of extreme provocation. In fact, you're not aware of it, there were 8 people arrested for theft and assault 2 nights ago by our staff, where they assaulted other fellows who were in the camp itself, and they threatened to stab them. Our staff arrested them, they were found in possession of stolen goods, and they were detained at Richards Bay. So we're making an active duty of ours to manage the camp as it goes on. It's just something Alderman Smith raised, to raise with you. There are 800 people that are now in treatment regimens for either high blood pressure, for TB or diabetes, or other chronic illnesses that were never diagnosed before in the camp. They're now in active medical treatment on a daily basis since they've been in the camp, and that can only lead to an improvement in their lifestyle. So as much as there's been concern raised by Doctors Without Borders and some of the other institutions, social distancing is what it's come down to, and we are fully compliant as at this morning. Every day we get hammered by our own environmental health practitioners to say you need to comply, you need to comply. And with people moving out, voluntarily going into houses and us moving some people out, we've been able to reach the required. In fact, as we are now, we have capacity for releasing under 200 people to go into the camp and still be fully compliant with the required COVID regulations in terms of social distancing, which is a higher requirement than normal, and one understands why that is that.
So, Kellen, you had a follow-up?
An additional question to that. With all this sort of backlash and complaints that you're receiving over the past few days, is there any possibility that you might close the site? Is there any sort of possibility that you might do that?
No, ma'am. No, because we don't think that the site has any reason to be closed. There's a lot of politics around this. So I can tell you, for instance, that when we tried to determine what level of media access the media had at sites elsewhere in South Africa, I contacted my colleagues elsewhere in South Africa to ask them if they had free access to the site. We're determining that now. The answer from at least one so far is no. They as councillors can't go into the site. And we're trying to find out if the media are allowed to go and access freely. I suspect the answer will be no, but we'll see. And one of my colleagues said that they had early on gotten involved with one of the NGOs and were actively helping to resolve the site. So if I may just maybe make one comment, seeing as how much politics we've been exposed to. In some places, where certain parties are in opposition, they try and make things work. Where other parties are in opposition in other parts of the country, less so. So my colleague Alex Christians, is at a site assisting to try and make it work on that side. Here we find ANC politicians trying to score political points. There's a difference in attitude and approach to what your role is as a public office bearer. And I will tell you, some of what is happening is purely expedient and malicious. I have been in politics for 20 years. I have a good barometer of what is reasonable and decent and appropriate, and when people are just engaged in petty politicking. What we're seeing now is petty politicking. We are trying very hard to make this site work. And I think if in the end, when we are done, all is said and done, and if we to do an external, an independent assessment of how these sites work, I don't know that Cape Town is going to come anywhere near the bottom of the list once we start spelling out measurable criteria of assessment of the experiences people had, of whether this is good or bad. It is easy to set up a token site for 100 people and make it look good when you're not actually trying to accommodate 3,000 people. Because you've made no reasonable effort. You're just leaving people to their own devices on the street. That's also disingenuous and dishonest. So we must see the full picture and not engage in eye blindry, because there's a little bit of that also going on. It's irresponsible to show up at a site and be and expect to be allowed to enter. You don't show up at the Salvation Army and be given free access. You don't show up at the Haven Night Shelter and you're given free access. You don't show up at any national government or facility and be given free access, as was claimed, that the media have free access to government facilities. You don't show up at our transport management center and you're given free access. So we are trying to be consistent. The legal opinion we obtained speaks to access to the media, and in fact, we are now operating in terms of that legal opinion, which has given, which supplies a very solid legal argument for why we must be careful on how access is granted to the site in terms of the rights of the people on the site itself. All right, other questions? Marvin?
Hi, JP. I just wanted to find out, has law enforcement perhaps identified any hotspots where these meetings will see occur? And also the Minister of Police today emphasized the stance on the community watches, and they say that obviously they are not allowed to do community watches. What is your response to that, and how do you feel about that?
Director Roberts, if you want to speak to the looting.
Yes, regarding to the looting and breaking, maybe just to start off with the breaking to bottle stores and to liquor shops, it's all over in the province. It is not only contained to the metropole alone, but all over in the province, and on a daily basis at the Joint Operational Committee meeting. The ICC report gives us feedback with regarding to all the incidents in terms of liquor shops, and that forms part of the hotspots analysis that's been provided to us in order to plan and to deploy our members accordingly. Regarding to the looting, the two main areas was really Manenberg and Mitchell's Plain, and it was due to feeding scheme issues as well. But those are the two areas, and there were 6 incidents reported in those 2 areas.
Okay. In terms of the neighbourhood watches, Marvin, so I think we respect the Minister's decision. I don't agree with it, but I respect the Minister's decision that the neighbourhood watches should not deploy. I think it's a mistake because he's doing a one-size-fits-all approach to neighbourhood watches. Neighbourhood watches are not the same across the country. Cape Town has had a decade and a half of intensive investment in the training, development, resourcing, and integration of neighbourhood watches. Radios, jackets, torches, bicycles, vehicles, cameras, connections with the Transport Management Centre, where there are radio operators who engage with them. They've got hand radios, they've got auxiliary members or law enforcement reservists in between them. Keep in mind, Cape Town is still the only city with a police reserve service run by the city in terms of our law enforcement auxiliary service. So there's a very strong relationship. They're well developed, and they're far more integratable with your formal services than it might be in the other cases. Also, a very important difference is we have accredited neighbourhood watches. So you're not talking about fly-by-nights or vigilantes. You're talking about people who've gone through a rigorous process of legal vetting and screening, and who have managed to get their neighbourhood watch compliant with the standards provided by the Community Safety Act, which are quite rigorous. Some say too rigorous. So there is a solid base to work from. We are not deploying neighbourhood watches to patrol. As such, we are recruiting additional disaster management volunteers. The point that the ED made and I made is that these have been operating since day one. Since the beginning of this declared disaster and during the lockdown, our disaster management volunteers, who are essential services workers, they're mentioned in the Disaster Management Act in Chapter 7, Subsection 2, Subsection 6. I'm happy to send you a screenshot of the section. They're explicitly mentioned as a proper and appropriate response to the disaster. And in fact, the regulation says that a city may recruit additional people into the disaster volunteer service to respond to a disaster. So precisely what we're dealing with here, a declared disaster, is precisely the intention that we actually recruit additional people. When you're looking for suitably trained, competent, skilled people who have an existing relationship with the safety and security environment, where do you find them better than in well-resourced neighbourhood watches, namely accredited neighbourhood watches? Hence our call. We've had over 40 volunteers. I think more will add themselves in the next few days, and over the next couple of days, most of those will be appointed on a temporary basis to the Disaster Volunteer Service so they can help us with social distancing, so we can prevent further infections at supermarkets. It is pointless for the entire population to go through a lockdown, only to have it defeated where people stand in queues at supermarkets waiting to go in. So, I mean, if that's an avoidable defect, then we can address that. We went to go on the ride along a couple of days ago with Metro Police. It was terrible to see the level of the failure to comply with the regulations at many of the shops. And you realize that everybody else who is staying at home, every business that's going bankrupt, every person that is struggling to cope, is doing so for nothing if, when they go to shop, they're standing in those queues and getting infected there, as may very likely have been the case in at least one of the infections relating to a supermarket that we now see. Yes, madam. Renee?
Renee, there is a rape. I wouldn't say the rape hasn't happened. Yes, there is. No, but can I just say? The person was arrested in appeared in court. So there's a valid criminal case that's registered.
So he's appeared in court?
Yes, he's appeared. He's been remanded. It's a valid criminal case. He was arrested, he appeared in court. He was in fact arrested the day after the matter was reported. In fact, the same 24-hour period he was arrested on site and the matter was reported. There was a death in the first weekend. It was reported in the newspapers quite a few times already. Somebody died of natural causes During the first weekend with the doctor on site, it was not COVID related, it was natural causes. The city's never said it hasn't taken place. But today was a bit difficult when you actually making assertions to your staff, and then you phone your staff and say, what are they talking about? There's no clue about it. The staff member walks to the medical tent and he speaks with the system saying, well, there's nothing here. But to get a tweet saying the person's in the medical tent at the moment. So yes, there has been, the person's been arrested, he's appeared in court. Has been remanded to the 21st for further investigation. He appeared in Magistrates Court today. And the other matter was dealt with as a death of natural causes.
I can also just say with the rape, within 20 minutes of that rape allegation being made, and remember it was made 2 days after the incident allegedly happened. Yes, within almost no time, the rape victim had been removed to a site. She was tested, she was placed in a safe house, she then went to SAPS to lay a charge. An arrest was made, and throughout that whole process, our staff remained on site and remained engaged with it. So we took that very seriously, and we certainly didn't dismiss it or fail to deal with it. It is an allegation. The criminal justice system is not pronounced on the matter, so we will have to wait and see. The residents in the facility have different versions of what happened, so I am myself eager to see what the outcome of this matter is. With the death, it was natural causes that happened on, I think, the first night there already. The person passed away during his sleep, during the night. And considering the level of health and ailments and illness on the site, out of a population of that size, I think over this period of time, statistically, one might see one or more like that. There are many of the people staying there who are in extremely poor health. Yes. So everybody, it's a persistent allegation that people were not screened. I can give you the 100% assurance that everybody was screened. I think where the confusion comes in that some people expected to be tested. They expected some kind of sample to be taken or something, and that's not how it works. So everybody was screened. Anybody who seemed likely was tested. I think that there were 50-something,
54 tests, yes, that's right.
54 something tests that were done.
Yeah.
And most of those test results are back. It takes a while to get them back. No positive test results are back yet. Where people are high risk, they're still in isolation. They're staying separately in smaller tents. With the TB cases, similarly, everybody who was identified as TB positive were isolated. All the positive TB cases will remain in isolation. Several of them are now, I think 11 of them are now receiving treatment or something like that, and one has been hospitalized. And these are people who arrived with those ailments. It's not ailments or sicknesses that they incurred at the facility. They are conditions that some of them will have been living with for quite some time. How many are waiting COVID test results still?
There's still a batch of 18 that we're waiting test results for, and we're hoping we should be with us tomorrow or Friday. And just on that, in terms of the way we stocked the camp, it wasn't done all in one go. It was done over a series of 3 or 4 days to allow sufficient screening and testing to take place. So where people were identified with TB the moment they came in, they were put into a separate facility. And so you'll find that besides the big market tents, there are a lot of smaller tents for which have been isolated. All of them have resumed treatment, or some that were never on treatment before have picked up treatment. And obviously after 2 or 3 weeks, the ability to transmit it does reduce. So we never stopped the city up over 1 day. It took us over at least a week, and we took a break for 1 day to make sure we caught up with the backlog, and then we bring in a few more on the buses. So not 1,500 people pitched up at once. We did it over a series of 4 to 5 days. So there was adequate screening. In fact, it's almost as if we have a field hospital set up at Sramerton at the moment still. And we want to next week maybe reduce the level of service to maybe make it only a Tuesday and a Thursday, or Monday, Wednesday and Friday, because many of the people are now on treatment regimens that they're in a certain process. So the discipline is there already, so there might not be the need to have them there every day. And that's something we'll make a decision on Saturday morning when we meet again. So there's now an established process at the camp. More than 800 people that were not on treatment regimens before are now on treatment regimens. So that's been a very positive spin-off for us from it, in that these people on the streets with TB or other illnesses not even aware of it. Now we put them on a treatment, they're registered to the nearest clinic, and we've seen a general increase and an improvement in the health in the clinic also.
And again, I will remind you that anybody who's wanted to leave, up until now, we've allowed them to leave. Perhaps not without some engagement. So I think in all the cases there, the staff have made a genuine effort to try and keep people there, because there is still the hope that many of the people who are there now will not return to the street. That we will, over this period of engagement, over these few weeks, manage to convince people to return to families, to enter various accommodation options. Because remember, the people who we are dealing with in this case are the ones who generally decline assistance, who have rejected assistance in the past with social development or in terms of the safe space for shelter accommodation. So we have a unique opportunity to get people off the street, perhaps more permanently. And as such, Councillor Badruddin and his department is trying to do emergency procurement of converted or alternative building technology spaces to add to some of the shelters so we can augment their beds. So as people come out of the lockdown period, they're able to go into more permanent housing solutions off the street on a more permanent basis. So we are generally trying to use this disaster to achieve lasting positive outcomes. I'm confident that there are some people who will stay on in the safe spaces and the enhanced safe spaces and who we will not see return to the street. What that percentage is, that at the moment I can't tell you. I would wish to tell you it will be everybody and that nobody will go back to the street. But I don't think life works like that.
And then just to remind, and I think it's important, even if lockdown ends at the end of April, our state of disaster still exists. When the President declared the disaster a month ago, the initial period is 3 months. You can extend that disaster on a month-to-month basis. So we're actually looking at an initial period of 3 months and then looking at it, taking it from there. So just remember, disasters in operation for 3 months. Lockdown had a specific purpose to prevent spread. You might have another lockdown situation at some stage, depending on the nature of the spread. That's a possibility. But the disaster is actually 3 months, and he can then renew it on a month-to-month basis, probably based on information at his hand as to whether to extend it or not.
Marvin?
So, Jake, I just have a follow-up question. Last week we spoke about the modelling of how much the sample gain site costs the city. Is there any chance that you can give us today a definitive answer as to how much it is costing the city?
Do you have a final answer yet, Richard?
Alderman, at this stage in time, you're looking at about, over a 3-month period, you're looking at about 16 million. We are still busy defining the cost. Wingfield, it was costing for 2 tents, one has not been put up, so we've got a reduction there. In some of them, we made a few enhancements, they reduced the VAT, so it's been a bit of give and take. You're looking at about 16 to 17 million VAT at this stage.
So, between the feeding schemes, the contracted food supply, medical services, transport, cleansing services, private security, etc., we've not had final figures. We estimated that cost was going to be around 32 million rand a month is the figure. The ED is now giving you a figure substantially less than that, because when you budget originally, when you ask the finance department for money, it is on a worst case scenario because you can't ask them for too little and not be able to pay. As these costs are sifting down and we're negotiating with contractors and suppliers, and they're supplying multiple sites, some of those costs are becoming more clear now. And so we're looking at a figure of around 16 million. That, I suspect, will increase significantly if Kulenborg reopens and if we, depending on what happens at Wingfield and Payne City. Payne City, we are not yet supplying food. It's unclear about what our function and duties there are, considering that the site was created by national government. But the homeless facility at Payne City, which we intend to open on Monday, people will be getting food there. That is going to create immediate tension between the refugees who stay adjacent to it, who will see food being delivered for people staying in the homeless shelter, but they are not getting. So we are seeking rapid clarity with national government on that, so that does not become a point of contention or conflict between the people staying in the two separate facilities side by side. Anything else? Okay. Thank you very much. We are endeavouring to facilitate some live streaming of this in the future. We did choose a rather large venue so that none of you had to sit side by side as you two are irresponsibly doing. But thank you for those who did come through. And thank you to Executive Director Bosman and Director Roberts. They have extremely long days at the moment. You will have seen we put out a little video to our staff. It's just because at this stage we know that they are taking massive strain and making big sacrifices in their time. But I must say of these two gentlemen, I don't think there are many people in the city who take more strain and pain on a daily basis than Executive Director Bosman and Director Robbie Roberts, and I just want to express my appreciation to them. Thank you.